Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, I'm Audley Stevenson, and thank you for tuning into the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you taking a moment out of your day and being here with us as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. We're on Twitter and Instagram under the handle The Audacious Pod. And then if you head over to Facebook and enter the Audacious Living Podcast in the search engine, you'll find us there as well. And I'd ask you to be a part of that community. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel if you happen to be watching this edition of the podcast on YouTube. Then you can click the little notification bell down below, and you will be immediately connected. Every time there's new content that comes out, you'll get instant notification. So certainly I'd encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, tell a friend, do your part to keep this audacious conversation going. Now, you've picked a great episode to join us if you're here for the first time. And if you're a returning listener, I say thank you, because this episode is all about fun and good times. And that's what we're doing here on the Audacious Living Podcast. The topic of conversation literally is all about fun. And I'm pleased to have Dr. Michael Rucker join us, and he'll help us explore the science of fun with us a little bit further. Now, Mike has dedicated his entire career to positive psychology and the study of fun, or the academia term for fun is subjective well-being. And he actually's got a book coming out in the not-too-distant future called The Fun Habit, where he really dissects the topic of fun and gets into the science of it to help individuals better understand the importance of fun in our everyday lives. He provides strategies that we can use to ensure that we find ways to continue those fun times, and then just a general explanation of how fun improves our overall well-being. And hey, you think of the 90s film with Robin Williams, Patch Adams, the doctor who was injecting fun into the lives of his patients. So it's a really fun chat with Mike that I know you'll all enjoy. In fact, at the start of the conversation, we had a really cool reflective journey about hip hop and how it influenced us as a kid, and that was a lot of fun to reflect on that as well. So hey, we're all about fun here on the Audacious Living Podcast. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Mike Rucker. Enjoy.
Really connected to altruism and moving things forward. And so it was one of those rabbit holes I was happy to go down.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, growing up, so hip hop really meant a lot to me as a young teenager. I connected with the artists like, Big Daddy Kane and Cool G Rap and all these guys who they kind of made me feel like, you ever have like that uncle that kind of tells you those things on the side that your parents won't. That's what it felt like, right? So
Sure.
In my mind, they kind of had this connection, and they were integral to my growing up. And it's interesting that they weren't that much older than me, right? But nonetheless, that was who I connected with. So they were my uncles, I like to call them.
It was an interesting time, right? I mean, not to get off in that weeds, but I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I'm dealing with the gatekeepers of information.
Wow.
But it's funny that you say that, because I think most kids, I'm sure everyone's experience with it was different, but I remember when my buddy brought over an NWA cassette tape, because that's how old I am.
Yep.
And like putting it in and being like, what?
What do you want to do to the police?
Yeah. And but now my 9-year-old, I wasn't ready to share some mature information with her.
Right.
And she turned around and maybe rightfully, because I probably would have done it at her age, just Googled it, because that's what you can do now. And that's baffling. I mean, I kind of feel almost fortunate that I didn't have the access to information, that had to be sort of, to your point, it was given to you in doses.
Yep.
And anyways, I digress, but it was interesting. Yeah.
No, it is. And although you might think it's a digression, it's not, because I very much feel like that was a fun time for me. I would like to think of my childhood growing up and the learning in that fashion, discovering and opening up a whole new world for me. So I think we're very much in line with what we're talking about here, about to talk about. So I think we're good. We're all good.
Well, and then it's interesting too, right? Like, again, going down that rabbit hole about growth, because like, going back to the Beastie Boys, like certainly that wasn't the best message for me at that time, but right. I resonated with it because it was fun. And then, Ad Rock got challenged, right? Like, hey, you wrote all this crazy stuff when you guys were kids in Brooklyn. And he's like, yeah, and we grow, like you're gonna, it's an interesting time right now. Like, I certainly believe that, the reckoning needs to happen, and it's uncomfortable. Yes. But it's also interesting when you hold someone's feet to the fire when it's age appropriate,
Yes.
So, but that we're really getting off the rails.
We are. Well, the last point I'll make and I'll stop is I'm certain if we go back to a lot of these artists and we ask them about their music and ask if there's anything that they've ever said that they regret or they think twice about. And I mean, we talk about artists, comedians, whomever, art writers, all kinds of people. And you ask them, is there something that you've done now that you look at now that maybe you regret or think twice about? And I'm sure that I'll be like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that, or this wasn't appropriate, or, but it's the time that they were at, right? So there we go.
And it was manufactured. Like, you look at, Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin were asking them to do that stuff.
Yes.
Which is really interesting now, where you have kids just wanting to be kids. I don't know much about him, but, the little I know about Justin Bieber, where his handlers are doing the opposite, so it's really interesting how the pendulum has swung, where we used to celebrate the amplification of, boisterous behavior, fun behavior. And then now, we're limiting it, obviously. So it's, it's, and now I feel old too, right? Like, as a 50-year-old being able to sit in my armchair and but I can only imagine how I'm proud of who I was and had, I've always felt good about most things in my life. But certainly if social media were around, it would have been troublesome for almost all of my life.
Yes, I agree. I'm with you on that one, Mike, for sure. And I had no idea, again, that this rabbit hole would go down, but I appreciate that. I was not expecting to have a introspective look at the intricacies of hip hop music back when we were children. But anyhow, nonetheless, certainly wanted to, and I appreciate you being here to have this conversation, the topic of fun, and really why it resonates with me is that I kind of feel that's how I've lived my life, and it's been a core aspect of who I am. And so to know that there's an entire science around it, and that there's the people putting real work into this, sort of validates me a little bit. So that certainly is one of the reasons. But I wanted to reach out to you, and glad that you could be here. I wonder if we could start off with you sort of talking about kind of what got you on this path.
Yeah. So the origin story of this is I've been a big sort of advocate of positive psychology. I found a gentleman by the name of Marty Seligman, who's written a bunch of positive psych books. Him and Csikszentmihalyi tend to be two of the male figures that are spoken about a lot when we talk about at least academic positive psychology.
Right.
In fact, the IPPA, which is the International Positive Psych Association's conference, was just this past week. And I'm a charter member of that organization. And so I've been kind of following, the science of positive psychology, which is more about happiness, and in academia, we call it subjective well-being.
Okay.
And I've been using a lot of the tools, things like savoring and gratitude journaling and things of that nature pretty effectively up until 2016. I'd really been pursuing happiness. And that year, my younger brother unexpectedly passed away. He had a pulmonary embolism. And around the same time, I also found out that I had advanced osteoarthritis. And I had been up until that point an endurance athlete, and then was basically told that I wasn't going to run again.
Right.
And so it was a year where, I had kind of lived this Pollyanna life up until that point, and things, were really good. And so I was trying to use some of these tools to kind of get back into this, zone of happy, and it just wasn't working. And so, I was like, there's got to be another way. And so, long story short, being an academic, I sort of started digging into the research and realized that even though we've been talking about happiness for quite some time, there really wasn't, with the exception of, things with regards to elementary school design and stuff like that,
Right.
There wasn't a ton of research done on fun, which is a lot, employs a lot more what we call in science agency, right? Like a lot more of our ability to take action, rather than just sort of thinking about, our emotions and things of that nature. And so I kept trying to be happy. And the more that I chased happiness, the more I wasn't happy. And, fast forward 5 years from now, come to find out that, people that are overly concerned about happiness do tend to be less happy. And the reason that we believe that is true is because when you're sort of always focused on, how can I be happy, you're generally looking at what's missing in your life, right? Like, this whole idea of comparing yourself to the Joneses. There's something called the hedonic treadmill, that no matter what you do, we generally tend to fall back to an emotional state that we're comfortable with, right? Contrast that to fun, to answer your question, it's very much an action-oriented approach. So as long as you're not looking to always one up the next thing, you can always interject fun activities. And once you have a bias towards fun, that sort of becomes your modus operandi, as it were. Everything else kind of falls in place because you're not necessarily looking for rank. You're looking at fit, right? Like, how do these things fit into my life? And you're able to curate a lot better, right? Like, hey, this really isn't pleasurable for me. I'll get rid of it. This is pleasurable for me. Let me explore it. Let me use my curiosity to find more of it. Let me find, a fun guy to talk to hip hop about,
Right.
You're just a lot less concerned about what's happening to you, and you're using your agency to, create the life that you want to live.
Got you. I very much appreciate that, the explanation, because that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask about, was the correlation between sort of happiness and fun, right? And how fun can lead into that, because I think it's possible where you can have, you're having a bad day, or maybe you're not going through an enjoyable experience, but you can still interject some aspect of fun, which could increase it, or it could turn your whole day around, or it maybe just be for that moment. Is that fair to say?
No, it's absolutely. What I was going to interject is that was the big epiphany when my brother died, is like, I don't want to identify as happy. Every time I try to do, it's not a happy time for me. Like, I need this time to grieve. At the same time, and I'm geek speak a little bit. So when we talk about emotion or affect in science, we either say something's on the positive side of valence or the negative side, right? And so, in general terms, you're either having fun or, you're not, right? Like, and there's all these word clouds that we could go through that we're not, because, people know what's fun for them, and people know what's, agonizing for them. It could be boredom, it could be, et cetera, et cetera. So there were things that I wanted to do that were going to bring me joy, where I didn't necessarily have to say I'm a happy person, and that's what I discovered. Because a lot of times you're sort of searching for happiness, like, what I need to process my brother's death, or, what is there to process? Like, that's just kind of lame, like, it happened, and some things in life suck. And eventually, I will sort of, get to this acceptance, but there wasn't I wasn't wronged, it was just happenstance, right? And so what was really needed there was time. And so I could either spend my time like wallowing, and that's fine if you need to do that. We all process grief in different ways. That wasn't necessarily what I needed to do because it was just really bad luck. And so I started, figuring out how can I look at my schedule and interject things that I will find fun given my circumstance. And like I was blown, like, holy cow, we don't talk about this enough. Like, because you need to do it in a way that's with empathy, right? Like some people, if you have clinical depression or things of that nature, because sometimes, I'll go on podcasts that really do have a psychological slant. And
Right.
There's someone by the name of Sonia Lubomirsky out of UC Riverside that's done a lot of research about what percentage of our biology versus our happenstance has to do with happiness, right? And so based on a lot of research that she's done, we're in control of about 50%. So 40% is biological, 50% is sort of within our control, and then 10% has to do with happenstance, like, where you were born, what kind of resources you have, things of that nature. And so, if you're clinically depressed, I just need to be careful, like some of these things might not work, right? Because you really need to get on level footing. But if you're not, if it's just, things aren't breaking your way, or, there's a series of bad luck, or you're in a place, divorce, some sort of loss,
Sure.
You can still go out and have fun. And a lot of people don't understand that, because instead they'll sit and wonder, kind of perseverate on their circumstance. And that's what I really love about fun, is that, especially when you look at components of it, like laughter, playing, they really are equalizers if you look at them at face value, right? Like, you can go to a pickup game of soccer or basketball, and you have folks all walks of life. And as long as they aren't judging each other or trying to like figure out each other's circumstance, in that moment, they're having fun, and you don't really need to know, and so that part is what I think is lovely. And also you can choose to have fun.
Yeah.
The next hour we could go out and go, you know what? I'm going to go race my car, or, whatever you find fun.
Well, and it's so much in the moment, right? Like I think, and I think that's a key one. So regardless, what you're going through, what's happening in the broader world, there's all sorts of bad things happening in the world. That doesn't mean fun can't exist. So I think the point about being in the moment, Mike, is really important.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Uh, adults struggle with this a little bit, because they think we're supposed to be adults, and when you're adults, you're supposed to behave a certain way, and you love the innocence of children, right? Because children get it, and they have fun, and they always have fun, they seem to, and we sometimes got to learn from them. I want to sort of talk about sort of the problems that adults, the misconceptions they place on themselves.
Yeah, no, that's so I'm really fascinated by this topic. In the book, The Fun Habit, that's coming out, I talk about it. I did a bunch of research for the book, and I went to children's museums and science museums, where adults and children, cohort and play.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I found the most fascinating is when children and adults, obviously usually their parents, because, adults without children aren't really welcomed. But so when parents come in with their children, for the most part, the children, in these experiential places where you have things like blocks, and tubes, and, you can build stuff, children will go in there and immediately start having fun. Their eyes light up, they get excited. There's this, moment of arousal, like, wow, what can I do? If there are other children there, they start to, what we call storming, forming, and norming. They'll start groups, figure out who the leader is, assign tasks. No one tends to get upset. Adults will sit in those environments paralyzed because, and it's not necessarily our fault, right? It's because the world is complicated, right? And to make sense of the complexity, we learn what science calls heuristics as we go through life. And we learn these sort of subconscious and conscious algorithms, so that we can operate, and so that we're not overwhelmed by this mass amount of ambiguity. But because of that, a lot of the times in places that should be a lot of fun, we sit there waiting for instructions. So I would sit in these environments and the parents would be paralyzed. And, some that were too, I guess, embarrassed to ask would just sit there and kind of, be flies on the wall. The others who, had a little bit of, either curiosity or, the gumption, would ask the folks at these science centers, like, so what do I do? Like literally why the kids have already been off to the races for 20 minutes,
Right.
And literally being, having to be told like, okay, well, you put one block on top of the other, right? And as soon as they got that invitation to play, then they were having just as much fun, if not more fun than the kids. And so, being the geek that I am, I did dig into the research, and that's a real problem because, what we do as adults is we don't want to be curious anymore. We kind of want to be told what to do because, especially in the West, there is this, meritocracy, and we get rewarded for sort of, putting on our blinders and doing our job and
Right.
Executing the tasks that we've been told to do, especially if we're not in a, creative field. And so creativity and curiosity get stifled. And ultimately, we are left to just sort of be bored, which isn't a very fun state to be in.
Gotcha.
And so if you practice having fun, especially if you do it through, ways to foster wonder or ways to foster curiosity, you will see creativity increase quite profoundly. Again, these are things that sound so simple. So oftentimes, it used to frustrate me. Now I just kind of smile where people scoff like, oh, okay, fun, and like, yet when it's studied in a lab, these have profound effects, where you'll go back into your job reinvigorated and oftentimes able to see problems in a whole new light. It's why, again, if we talk about fun in its broadest, context, that it's just pleasurable activity. That's why, like, people will be singing in the shower or on a nice, nature hike and get their most profound insight for work because you're not thinking in a linear fashion anymore.
That's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. I mean, again, the curiosity and having fun, it opens up and it allows you, it gives you a bit of focus too, as well too. Like you can open up in a different area and be able to look back on something and focus and be like, okay, and solve. I always say I solve all my problems in the shower. Like the problems of the world.
A lot of people,
Yeah, that's exactly it. But I think as adults, certainly fear is a good, a drawback. Life experiences, we've gone through something and we kind of carry that baggage, so to speak, and those are all things. And I'm glad that you talked about that stifle fun, because those are sorts of things that kind of hold us back. We don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and I think the one that we haven't mentioned is a sense of duty, right? I think a lot of folks, it's a very interesting time, and there are a lot of schools of thought on it. I'm certainly not a parenting expert because I know there's some really good ones out there, but I've talked to a lot of them so that I can at least, talk about this topic from a place of knowledge, maybe not pure wisdom, but, in the West, we have a plethora of different parenting styles. And a real problem that's happened, at least in my generation, is that parents don't feel that their kids are safe in the open play, right? When I was a kid, I got on my bike and played with kids, and that gave the license to my parents to do fun stuff so that they could have their own life, right? Now we're so integrated in with our children that we have this sense of duty to always be on and protect them. And it's causing some harm, unfortunately, because the one thing, to circle back to children, the one thing that's so amazing about children is that they do have an amazing capacity for curiosity, right? When this is tested, if it's been unabated and not coached, it's amazing what they can do. It's like a genius level, based on, whatever contrived scientific instrument we're measuring it. But what we found is that in this new parenting style, especially in, the modern Western parenting style, parents will come in and coach and be like, no, you should do it this way. You should do it this way. Immediately, the kid goes into this role like, okay, my parent is trying to coach me. Curiosity gets thrown out of the window for both, right? And then the kid's just waiting for instruction, the same way you're waiting for your parents to tell you when to go to bed. And it's not anyone's fault. We're just, it's just sort of like we used to have the autonomy and the agency as children
Sure.
to learn it on ourselves. And now we're being spoon fed. And then we're wondering why kids are bored, right? Like, because they're just waiting for, the next.
We haven't given them any instructions yet.
And what's a shame is that they're finding their autonomy with video games. And so I'm not, I don't villainize that at all. I mean, in a previous life, I made money marketing video games for Sony. So, and loved Tony Hawk because I was never a great skateboarder. And so to be able to vicariously live, as an amazing skateboarder through that video game, I don't villainize it. But what I have learned through the science is the reason that kids are in droves, not only because of access, but also because, parents are robbing them of that autonomy to be able to have this safe space where they can do whatever they want. So, it's twofold. It's not just a technology problem. It's the fact that we aren't giving them that space where they can make a mess, where they can break eggs, where they can figure it out.
That's right. I mean, I remember as a kid being told, get out, like play was encouraged, right?
Yeah.
Go out and play and come back when the streetlights are on, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And whatever happened in between the time I left and came home was up to me as a child to figure out. And again, that's when the opportunities for curiosity or exploration, and I don't mean social friends, all those sort of things come into play, but I think it was encouraged. And that's really what your point is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just that those opportunities to explore, like a couple other studies, it's a little bit tangential, but some that I found fascinating in the book, I talk about experience versus toys, right? And that's something that's picked up, that you hear about, experience instead of things. Like that makes a nice meme. So I want to go, okay, what is the true science behind that? No, some of the that I find the most fascinating is they'll give kids, in these labs, different sets of toys. So let's just use two hypotheticals, right? One kid will get 4 toys, and another kid will get 12, and each one of them is given an instruction what the toys do.
Okay.
The person with the 4 toys, in most cases, or in a significantly manner, will be a lot more creative and use those toys more than the person that has 12 and kind of knows that each one does one thing, right? And so again, the more that we're instructive and the more that we sort of have this abundance of like, okay, here are all these tools, but I'm not going to let you think, it's just it causes problems. So
Gotcha.
Sorry to get a little esoteric there on you, but I mean, it's just so replicatable that the more that we kind of get in the way of children, the more we rob them. And the reason I bring all that up is, to kind of put a final point on your original question, and that's what we've done as adults too, right? We look for guardrails because we're afraid of the third rail, right? And so one of the things that I suggest is like, how can we undo some of that in a way that feels safe to us, right? Like, how can we foster our own creativity? How can we take those steps? And some of it is, I do have children, so how do I find opportunities where I kind of let the kids lead and create a space where if they do break eggs within that environment, that there is no consequences.
Got you. So on that, the idea, when we sort of talk about looking for ways, would you support the idea of like structuring time for fun? Is that a good approach?
Yeah, and so that's funny because there is a paradox there, right? Because it certainly is that spontaneity is an ingredient of fun, but I think as adults, we absolutely do need to schedule fun, and it's something that isn't just like a one-off recommendation. It's interwoven into much of what I recommend, because we've learned, speaking of digital tools that are all kind of influencing us, that if something is on our calendar, it's immutable, right? And so everyone that I've talked to, especially folks that succumb to hustle culture, which tends to be a lot of folks that I reach, they need to preserve that time on their calendar, because if not, they won't do it. And so not only do we need to schedule that time so that it does happen, there's a whole host of things that benefits that come from that, right? One, it makes you mindful of how am I going to use that time. So it's not just like you're leaving fun up to chance and happenstance. Two, it allows for transition rituals, right? So like if I'm scheduling a fun night with my family, at 6, I'm breaking from work. I'm not walking into the house on my phone and like, hey, you know, Sloan is my daughter, said, hey, Sloan, you know, give me 10 more minutes. We're, you know, that is, we don't think much of that, but, you know, at her age, that's an emotional cue that, you know, you're not important to me. And you know, that I'm prioritizing work over fun with you. And even, you know, for folks without kids, right? Like, you know, again, going back to memes, right? But where you see 4 people at happy hour and they're all on their phones, you know, really just finishing the day. What's the point of you guys being together? This is just an extension of work, right?
That's right. That's right.
So yes, to answer your question, absolutely schedule it, and not only schedule it, but make it immutable. Where, you know, if fun is scheduled at 6 o'clock, you know, do that transition. Start to wind down at the office at 7:45. If you need to close loops, you know, be on your phone then, and then know, you know, once you cross that threshold, whether you work from home and that's just walking out of your home office, or you're actually walking out of the physical building, that work is done, you know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. This ties into something I've heard you speak on, activity bundling. This is an opportunity to do that as well. Could you explain what that is, just so our listeners understand that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, so that one's fairly simple. I mean, it's sort of a twofold thing. One is borrowed from behavioral science, but you know, at the simplest, it's really just adding something to what you're already doing, right? So again, these sound simple, but put into practice, they can have, you know, quite a profound effect, right? So, you know, if you're eating lunch and you have a best friend if you're eating lunch at work and you have a best friend that works, you know, in the vicinity, why not, you know, invite that friend to work? Right. One that's studied quite a bit is mundane work, like, you know, personal house cleaning, or perhaps cleaning out your inbox where, you know, you've kind of parsed your emails that you really just need to get through, but don't necessarily, you know, need deep work behind them. Like, you know, putting on your favorite hip hop, you know, just to get through it. So that experience is more pleasurable. The other aspect of it is habit bundling, where if there is something that's like a not fun task, you can bundle it with a fun reward at the end of it. And so you know, you're anticipating that fun, but you make the overall experience, you know, better. So like, if I, you know, a lot of times we talk about it in regards to exercise, right? If I exercise, you know, with my friends, then, you know, we'll be able to go get drinks afterwards. And so what we found is that, you know, by culminating activities, we can get a lot more punch for our time. Because I'm not a big believer in time management. Whenever you hear like, you know, someone from productivity, like, we're going to put more hours in your calendar. Right. You know, I keep waiting for that magic to happen, and I haven't, you know, I haven't seen anyone stretch the day into 26 hours yet, right? But be able to, you know, add that in, you can make things that, you know, normally would just sort of be mundane, habitual activity, again, like eating lunch, right? And you can start to make those more fun. You know, even if that's just, you know, during the pandemic, what I tried to do was, you know, just reach out to friends, because, you know, it's obviously a timely example that might not be evergreen, but I found that most of us were sort of just sitting there, you know, eating lunch by ourselves. And so, you know, it's just being mindful of that fact, like, hey, let me just reach out to folks and, you know, be the one that makes that connection.
Right.
Hey, Luke, what are you doing? You want to catch up over lunch? You know, we can just eat our lunch together. And, and like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You know, all it takes is one adult to make the invitation. And if someone's too busy, you know, nice thing about being an adult is we have a full toolbox of excuses, right? If you didn't want to hang out with me,
no shortage.
Yeah. And then, you know, that form of activity bundling for me is actually pretty cool, because the few people that wanted to make it a habit with me, one, we were all checking in on each other, because a lot of us were suffering a bit. I mean, I won't hide from the fact that I got a bit depressed last year. You know, it was a weird time. I'm a fun guy, right? And all of that was getting stifled. Plus I had this, you know, book too. But what it evolved to is a couple of us would do it walking too. So instead of just eating lunch, we also turned it into an activity. Whereas like now we're not just bundling two activities, there's pro-social behavior of being able to connect. We're out in nature, so that's feeling better. And I'm getting exercise, and so, yeah, all it takes is that little mindfulness of like, how can you make simple tweaks, nothing too profound so that it becomes overwhelming, but just like little, and I hate to call it optimization because I think optimization can burn us out. It's more just like, what could I do? Like, could we invite, a couple more people to make this more fun,
Well, and what I love about that, Mike, it's a very conscious thing that you're doing, and you're consciously creating the habit, right? And then it develops into this thing that you regularly do, and all of a sudden you've got this, and now you're not even thinking about it. Oh, let me do this fun activity. It's just let me do this activity that I enjoy.
Yeah, and a collaborator of mine that helps me edit my blog post. She's a true introvert. So I always feel like I have to be her voice because I always talk about all this pro-social behavior nonsense. And so like, even if you're an introvert where you don't want to connect with other people, you can still be mindful for it. So like, she realized that she was bored. She didn't necessarily, she did want to connect with one person at a time, but it didn't want to necessarily always make it about, doing something extravagant. So, but still being mindful of like, okay, are there 2 things a week that I'm doing where I'm like, this is purposeful fun, instead of just complaining about being bored, and it's that simple, right? There's 168 hours in our week. If you can't, dedicate 2 of those hours to something that sort of fills you up, then, you probably have other concerns about listening to a podcast.
Yeah. No, I think filling you up is the key in all this. Like, you've got to find ways, and I think a really important piece about this is the I guess subjectiveness of fun, because I might like roller coasters and you may not, right? So
no, that's exactly right.
It's also understand that it is to a certain degree an individual journey that we're all taking.
No, that's right. So it's a bit insider baseball, so oftentimes I won't bring it up, but so we talked about valence, but that, if you look at it as a 4-quadrant model, arousal is really, the gauge of our tastes, right? And so to your point, like, I often bring up, I love heavy metal music and my wife hates it. Her type of fun is reading a good book, so that's what we'll do. If we're both sitting at the pool, I'll have my earbuds in, with this high arousal sort of, pleasurable experience, and she'll be reading a great book, slow and steady. And both of those are equally as fun, in a subjective context. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. It's, again, the idea of creating it, interjecting it, understanding, this is what works for me. And again, we're all different, right? And so once we respect those differences, and hey, let's go to the movies. I don't really like the movies. Okay, then we won't, because you don't like them. I mean, it's, again, that's just an example, but it's really just understanding one another, I think, is really important in all this.
Yeah, no, that's right. So we'll find, ways where we do meet in the middle, and then also, being able to give each other space, and then also being open to try something, with an open mind. And then, if you don't like it, then you cross it off the list.
Gotcha.
I advocate for something called a fun file, and that's what's neat about it, right? Like, okay, I might not necessarily like musical theater, but if I were, our compromise would be, the Book of Mormon. And so that's definitely on our list, right? Because like, yeah, I'm not a big theater guy, but I like, Trey and Matt. So, I'll take the risk there, so there's always ways to sort of, if you deliberate, especially with a partner, where you'll find a common ground for sure. If not, again, big problems.
This is true. I was going to say, going back to the whole scheduling thing, why I like that. One of the things that I truly believed and have always tried to live by, so to speak, is the idea of having something to look forward to, right?
Yep,
and Mike, I truly believe that the quality of life increases if every day you've got something that you're looking forward to. So if you're scheduling it and you've got it in your calendar, it's something that you'll enjoy in that moment, I think that affects and spreads out to the whole day potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, going back to the science of savoring, I think, having things to look forward to, things to engage in, knowing that you have agency over your, over your time. And then, also reminiscing in fond memories, right? So all of that is part of the package. As long as, I guess the only, again, sort of insider baseball, but the one thing that we're like a word of caution about looking forward is just as long as you're not playing it up, right? So what, there are a few studies to suggest, again, because we're, one of the downfalls of being human is we do love to compare, right? And so one of the follies of happiness is it always seems to be that we're judging one experience against the other. So, yes, look forward to pleasurable experiences, but like, don't build up something in your head like, I can't wait till this vacation like crosses off X, Y, and Z, right? Because then oftentimes we'll get there and it didn't meet our expectations. And so I do try to look forward to fun events, but I don't try to levy any sort of expectations. So just that one caveat,
Yeah, and I think too as well. Like, so I'm looking forward to this vacation, and I've spent all this time. It's 6 months away, and all the things that between now and then, I also could enjoy. But if you're got this big picture in front of you, you potentially, and we talked earlier about the significance of the moment and the now, right? And the chance of losing those things.
Yeah, I think like, example would be, I just went on a surfing trip with my kids. Nice. And leading up to it, I was really enjoying like getting myself aerobically prepared because I used to surf when we lived in California. We now live in North Carolina. And so these trips are far and few between, but I knew that if I arrived there unconditioned, that it wouldn't be as much fun. So I enjoyed the process of leading up to something. And then, but like, to eat my own dog food, Elsa was part of that trip. So there were a few days that didn't meet my expectations, but I didn't let that get in the way. So instead we pivoted and had some good dinners. And like, I shrugged off the fact that, it didn't go completely my way and we still had a ton of fun. So
no, that's true. A good point too. I like that. Cause I mean, I've gone on vacation, not enjoyed every meal at the resort, right? But it doesn't affect your overall trip.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The idea of sort of capturing moments and whether you journal or you show some gratitude exercise that you go through, I think there's some significance in that as well too, because it's call it reliving those moments of fun, if you will. Is that fair to say?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So it's a whole chapter in the book.
Oh wow. And also the listeners, I haven't seen a manuscript, so it's not like...
No, that's why you queued me up. I think this is 2 for 2. But so reminiscing is a huge part, and there is definitely an art and a science to it. I think similar to fun, it's really meant to be developed, based on your own taste. So I do villainize journaling a bit, only when it's overprescribed, because it's clear that when coaches say, you need to journal every day, that can become a very cumbersome experience, especially for people that are already busy. But if you do it, for things that are really meaningful for you, it's absolutely a great way to, capture events. There's a whole host of different technologies that can help you build, tangible books and things from your social media accounts and stuff, so that you can, relish in fond memories. When we go on vacation, I create treasure chests with the kids, so that, and it doesn't necessarily need to be things that cost money. You just pick up shells, because what we do know is when you have tangible elements, it can really bring back those memories and extend the power of fun, because you're able to relive that. And a lot of times, what we know from MRI studies, if you're really vividly recalling that memory, it can be almost as pleasurable as the real thing. Gotcha. So it could be a scent. If let's say you were on your honeymoon and there was vanilla bean in the room, it could be making sure that you carry that aroma in something. For me, a lot of times I'll write down song lyrics that were meaningful, because as I already told you, I'm a big music lover. So just recalling the song will bring back really, really fond memories. And so, either creating a repository for those memories, curating those memories in some way. Like another thing I advocate for is, especially big events, like let's take weddings, for example, since you'll get this really expensive photo album, right? That you would never want your kids to, get. Yeah, but you want your kids to live that, right? So, why not create, through Shutterfly or something else, like a $30 version that they can destroy, and like, what a great way to reminisce, through someone that's going to ask you probing questions and has a genuine interest in, why their, mother and father were a prince and princess for a day, right? And then, so there's just some great ways. And then, some more advanced strategies. One thing that I'll do is actually put time in my calendar to reminisce. So like, a bunch of my friends, we went to a big concert in the Dominican Republic, and I marked the day on my calendar so that I could reach back out to them in a year and be like, hey guys, do you remember that? It's not something that everyone does, right? And so when they're like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you remember that. Like, that was a year ago, and that just created like a really great hour for all of us to sort of relive it, potentially plan for the next trip. I won't lie to you, we said we would and it didn't happen, but that, we'll blame it on COVID.
That's right.
And then, something that I talk about a little bit too, that's a little bit darker, so I hope we're not ending soon, but I do like the idea of memento mori. So here's a picture of me and my brother. One of the last things we did, we rode King Dakar in New Jersey. It's the tallest roller coaster in the world, and it's one of the last things we did before he passed away. And so, that's a reminder of how much fun we had together, but the fact that, things are fleeting, and so not to waste that time at all.
Mike, that's not dark at all, because I think if you remember these moments of joy, right, and that's your lasting memory, we, our loved ones that we lose, we keep them alive through these happy memories and through. Correct. So I absolutely, I think that's a great idea. When you talked about the photo album, I thought my eldest daughter, when she was younger, we actually had a photo album that she used to, it was an old album of different events, and she used to love going through, and she is obsessed with it. But and I remember, because we're so, you were visual people, but whenever I'd go, it would sit down and go, that's so and so, that's so and so. I found myself inside going, oh man, I remember that too. And so you are reliving that, right? So I thought of that story when you brought up the photo album.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're great reminders, and as long as you like take it one step forward, you just take action, right? Like, oh my gosh, you tell a story about Sam and you realize I haven't talked to Sam for a year, and you have one of two choices, right? To either just sort of acknowledge that sucks, or, actually do something. And if you're mindful to do something, then, fun is actually contagious, right? Like, so another sort of scientific thing that we talk about is social contagion, and it goes both ways, right? It's like, misery certainly loves company, but so does fun, right? And so like, you light someone up and it almost always comes back to you. I'm not a big spiritual guy, but that one's been blowing me away a little bit. Like, I think the reason I didn't really tie it into, is that if you wait around, similar to, some of the criticisms we've had about happiness, throughout our discussion, if you wait around for something to reciprocate, you're gonna it's gonna be a long time. Right. But I just found the more you put out there, somehow it boomerangs back, as long as you don't wait for it, to boomerang back. Sure. And why not? Anyways, even if it doesn't boomerang back, it's just more fun.
Yeah, totally. Mike, this has been really awesome, and I think, and one of the reasons I was like I said before, I was looking forward to this chat because I thought it was a lot of fun. But I also felt that when you look at this podcast and we talk so much about living our best lives and living our most audacious lives, and a lot of that is tied into happiness. Well, there's a direct correlation to fun and happiness, and I think the key though, and you sort of touched on and alluded to a couple of times, and I want to ask you lastly around how we continue to create the starting point for creating these habits of fun, because there are people that are going, okay, I'm going to get conscious about it now. What does that look like as my starting point to create these habits that I'm instituting fun? What would you say to those individuals?
Yeah, so we've talked about it all, so I can coalesce it into sort of a prescription. I think the first thing to do is really look at do a time audit and, kind of revolutionize it. So there's 168 hours in our week, and we habituate so much more than we believe, right? So similar to, you know, a registered dietitian asking you to do a nutrition journal. You know, it's kind of one of the least fun things I'd ask anybody to do. But if you look at your week, 80% of it's always going to be sort of the same, right? And so you take that, you look at opportunities of, you know, we talked about, even if it's just 2 hours, where can I inject a couple, you know, areas of fun? And so there's two ways you could go about that. One, what are things that I don't need to do anymore that are just, you know, miserable things that I do? Maybe it's watching a show that you're like, wow, I don't even know why I'm watching that anymore. Right. You know, whatever it is, like, what can I remove from my schedule so that I have some opportunities to put new things in. And then, you know, really challenging some of, you know, what I call story editing of why things might not happen, right? Like, let's say you want to dance with your partner, right? I mean, that's kind of a cliche, but we'll use it because a lot of people, you know, and I hear so many adults go, oh, well, we couldn't do that on a Wednesday because that's a weekend thing, right? And like, you know, just using, you know, just changing your mindset a little bit to be like, okay, this exercise is meant to be creative and challenge the status quo. And they're like, wow, what a dumb thing that was to think that I couldn't go have dance lessons on a Wednesday, right? And and so then, like, creating a fun file where you're looking at all of the things that you wish you could be doing that are either low-hanging fruit or, you know, big things. And so if you get stuck, you know, there are all sorts of prompts that we can use to sort of get out, you know, what did you have fun as a kid? What's bringing you FOMO? Like, you know, when you go on your phone and you're like, oh, you know, homeboy's doing this, like, what can, you know, why am I not doing it? Why aren't you doing it? You know, what would it take? And then a lot of times, you know, there's a couple other prompts, like, if you were turning 50 or 40 or 30 this year, like, what would be your big thing? Because for some reason, like, these big milestone things are what bring us out.
They bring the best out of us, right?
Yeah, but we can really do it whenever, right? So, like, there are all these silly ways to sort of bring it out. You know, and then just have that fun file and make sure that you're putting, you know, 1 or 2 things in each week. And it's that simple. Like, you know, it creates this upward spiral where, you know, in very few instances have I ever not seen that flywheel just start to kick, you know, once that happens.
Amazing. What can you tell us about the book, Mike?
The book comes out next summer. It's called The Fun Habit. It's coming out through Simon & Schuster. If you're interested in that content, please sign up for my newsletter at michaelrucker.com. Yeah, you know, the whole purpose of this is just to try and create more fun in the world. So, you know, love to, you know, be part of it. And thank you so much for having me on and allowing me to share a little bit of this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think the value of fun is good. I think of that Robin Williams movie, Patch Adams.
Yeah,
the doctor, right? And you look at what humor and fun and the wonderful impacts it had on, you know, on individuals who were sick. So I think, you know, injecting fun is a great way to lead to a long path of happiness. And thank you for your work, Mike. Thank you for being here. It's been awesome and fun.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Back we are here on the podcast, and I really appreciate you, Mike, for stopping through, hanging out, sharing your insights, expanding our knowledge on the topic and the science, especially the science behind fun. There's no doubt in my mind that your book, The Fun Habit, will be super informative, and I'd encourage listeners to pick up a copy when it comes out. I definitely will be grabbing mine, and if you're looking for information on Mike, you can head over to his website at michaelrucker.com for more detailed information, release date, all that good stuff. You know, Mike left us with so much to think about, but if there's just one thing I would take away from our conversation, it would be this. Fun offers us so much benefits, from improved health, to reduce stress levels, to increase energy, plus a whole host of other benefits. It's for this reason why we should look to interject fun in our lives at any opportunity that we can get. Even when things aren't going well, you could still have a bit of fun. Fun isn't intended to make your problems go away, and they won't disappear because you have fun. But it will at least help you feel good in the moment, and it proves that you can still have fun even in the darkest of times. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com. All you've got to do is enter in your email address, and you'll be immediately connected and notified every time there's new content that comes out. We've reached the end of another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. And as always, I got to send out a big, big thanks to our tremendous listeners and lovers of audaciousness. Thank you so much for your ongoing support of the Audacious Living Podcast. It certainly means a lot and fuel for us as we continue to provide listeners with so much great content. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, at the end of each episode, I encourage you to stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.